Several political parties are weighing in on the back of the Boksburg gas tanker explosion that took place on Christmas Eve. In fact, the good party is of the view that the City of Ekurhuleni might have flouted some regulations. The party says the city and the gas company have to come clean on whether there's been approved dangerous goods route plans in place and if these were actually followed. For more on this, let's bring in the organization's Secretary General, Brett Theron, who joins us via our video link this morning. Brett, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us on this Boxing Day, especially given the devastation around the story. And of course, naturally, there's going to be a whole lot of questions around how something like this could have taken place and whether or not the checks and balances were there. As far as you know, given the information at our disposal, what do you reckon are still some of the critical questions that remain unanswered?
Well, good morning. And I mean, the tragedy is a devastating tragedy, and our hearts obviously go out to those who've lost loved ones, and we hope those who are injured have a speedy recovery. But there are questions that need to be answered, and the questions are not complex, because this is a tragedy that should never have happened if the rules of the road had been adhered to. And it's really quite simple. The National Land Transport Act requires every municipality to have planned routes for the transportation by road of dangerous goods. So the City of Ekurhuleni must have the routes planned for the transportation of the kinds of goods that were being transported on Christmas Eve. And then the transport operator must obviously adhere to those routes. They must have accredited drivers. The drivers need a special driving permit in order to be transporting dangerous goods. But also they need to alert the chief of fire or the fire brigade for the City of Ekurhuleni when they plan to transport goods, and to inform them of what the goods are, the quantity, and the route that they plan to take. And if all that had been in place, then this tragedy should never have happened, because that truck should never have been where it was.
Yeah. I wonder how well we do typically, Brett, and I understand perhaps if you don't really know the answer to this question, but how well generally we do with following this National Land Transport Act. I think many people might be even hearing about it for the first time.
Well, the National Land Transport Act is really a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and most of it we do not follow, because most of it deals with the devolution of public transport functions to local government. But I think the one part that is generally followed quite well is the transportation of dangerous goods. Because if it wasn't the case, we would have many, many more incidents like this, where transport operators are on the wrong route, either deliberately or because the routes haven't been properly planned and communicated. So I would say that if we look back over time since the Land Transport Act came into effect, which was in 2009, we haven't seen very many of these kinds of tragic incidents on our roads. And so I think that generally the transportation of dangerous goods is following the law. But clearly on Christmas Eve, someone broke the law, because that truck should never have been passing under a low-level bridge like that.
Absolutely. There's going to be discussions around shared culpability here in many instances. I mean, the driver has some serious questions to answer. The company itself might be in the wrong, as you mentioned, if they don't have their own kind of plans around how to get something as dangerous as a fold-up tanker through the country. And then there's questions that you've now highlighted around the municipality having to, in some ways, answer to. I wondered what ways you reckon we should deal with that shared culpability in a context where the loss is really unimaginable. I mean, to have 15 people, including a 10-year-old, having died from this is incredibly heartbreaking.
Well, I mean, the loss is heartbreaking and devastating, and again, was completely avoidable. I mean, first of all, if the municipality of Ekurhuleni, the City of Ekurhuleni, did everything that it was supposed to do, in other words, have the dangerous goods route planned, and if they received a alert from the transport operator as to the transportation of these goods, and that route did not include transporting the gas under the bridge, then the focus falls on the transport operator and the chief of fire in the city of Ekurhuleni can proceed to revoke all of the transport operators' permits to transport dangerous goods if they broke the rules. If the municipality was alerted to the route, and the route included transporting that gas under that bridge, and failed to intervene, then the city of Ekurhuleni also needs to be held accountable. So I would suggest that the MEC for Transport in Gauteng needs to conduct an investigation.
Yeah, in fact, the Premier of Gauteng, we could see there, was also present as we take stock of the damage on infrastructure. So as far as you're concerned, Brett, the laws in this country are sufficient when it comes to protecting residents, for instance, from this kind of carnage, because that's the other real concern here, is that this explosion happened, affected several houses, including a hospital in Boksburg.
I think that we have very good rules and laws. I mean, there's the National Land Transport Act, which places the obligation on the municipalities to plan the routes that are safe for the transportation of dangerous goods on their roads. And then there's the regulations for the safe transportation of dangerous goods, which first of all describes what dangerous goods are, and then sets out all of the obligations of both the municipalities that the goods will be transported through, and the transport operators, and right up to the moment when, before the truck should be leaving, the chief of fire of the municipalities need to be alerted. So there are lots of checks and balances in place if the operators and the municipalities adhere to the rules. So this incident, again, as I say, would not have happened if the rules had been adhered to. I think we have really robust rules and laws in place to prevent the kind of tragedy that we saw on Christmas Eve, and to make the roads safe for all of us who use it, because the roads are shared spaces, and dangerous goods do need to be transported, and sometimes they do need to be transported by road. Yeah.
Although, that said and accepted, there are people who are suggesting that had we had the kind of rail infrastructure that this country needs, something like this could have been less of a probability, so to speak.
So look, I mean, there's no doubt that we have way too much freight and goods on our roadways, and there's not enough on rail, and we do need to shift freight and goods from road to rail. But there will always be some goods that, or some material that needs to be transported by road. And we have the rules in place and the laws in place to make that safe. And this event happened because someone broke those rules.
Sure. There are other organizations, including the EFF, calling for the sacking of the CEO of the company that essentially commissioned this driver to transport this gas tanker. Is the Good Party going that far?
Well, as I say, I mean, we need to understand whether the city has the route plans in the dangerous goods plans in place, and then of course the focus shifts to the transport operator. And if the transport operator was cutting corners, didn't plan their routes properly, didn't employ accredited drivers for those trucks, then obviously heads must roll there. But there are also the law also creates offences, and so there can be prosecutions, and there should be. I would say let the law take its course, but let's not let this be another event that causes all of this outrage and then dissipates as we focus on the next crisis.
Oh, and that's always the tragedy in this country, isn't it, Brett? We go from one crisis to another. Hopefully there's justice, at least for the families of those who've died from what's taken place. Brett Theron, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really do appreciate your reaction. Brett, speaking there as the Secretary General of the Good Party, as more political parties continue to weigh in on that Boksburg gas tanker explosion.